Hi, this is a message to the church. Um, I grew up in a Presbyterian church. I currently attend and I'm a member at a Presbyterian church. I also pastor within the presbytery. I love the Presbyterian church, their theology, their doctrine, and the family atmosphere, but I've never quite fit the shape or the form of a Presbyterian. If anyone were to ask me, what denomination are you? I can't really give an answer because I don't want any label. Although my church family is Presbyterian, I am a follower of Jesus, and that's it. I was reading this story in John about Jesus and the woman at the well, and I could do several messages from this one story alone, but today I felt God speaking to me mainly on the verse 21. And Jesus tells the woman that a day is coming when you won't have to go to a church building. You won't have to go to a temple to worship. This verse immediately proceeds after Jesus exposes the woman's sin in her life that nobody else knows about. He tells her, I know you don't have a husband, and I know you've been sleeping around with a bunch of guys and that you're not married to. And she goes, Oh, I can see you're a mind reader, so you must be a prophet. Well, in that case, our ancestors said we should worship up here on the mountain, and the Jews said we should worship in Jerusalem. Then Jesus says, the time will come soon when you won't need any building to worship. I think we put too much emphasis in our church buildings, in our traditions, our rituals, habits, whatever you want to call it. I think it may have come to a point that it's beginning to hurt the church. I say this because it seems sometimes that that's what it's all about. So I'm going to talk about church growth today, and we'll start with just church growth. If you look at the early church in the book of Acts, within the first 50 to 100 years after the resurrection, the church spread like wildfire across the world. And mind you, information didn't move as fast as it does now. We're currently in the center of this information age. They didn't have what we have. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cell phones. They may have had pigeons. If you were literate enough, you could write a letter or pay someone else to write a letter, but everything was spread by word of mouth and by action. On top of that rate of speed that the early church spread, this was all with the same fact that people were coming to Jesus, and they were knowing that there was a possibility that they could be hunted down and killed for that belief. They recognized the saving grace, the freedom of forgiveness. They recognized the hope in Jesus so much that they would risk their lives to believe it. We can't even understand that. We don't understand that. We can't even fathom our beliefs being put on the line, putting our lives in danger. Here in our Western culture, we are free to worship however, whenever, wherever we want. So we don't know what it's like to be at risk for our faith. So when we have all that freedom, why aren't we using it though? Why is the Christian church growing in places that are more dangerous, more in poverty, more persecuted? Why is the church growing better there than it is where we are allowed to worship? As far as the U.S. church growth goes, the U.S. is barely on the map. That's not to say that there isn't churches out there that are discipling and loving and being obedient and working and serving. I'm not saying that there aren't those churches out there, but there are far too many more churches not doing anything than there are churches that are doing something. Somehow, over time, the word church has actually changed in meaning. What was once a group and a body of people has now been labeled as a place or a structure. It was that way before Jesus came. It was a place, a ritual, a tradition, temples, laws, do's, don'ts. But after his resurrection, it was changed from a place to a people. But now, it seems as though a lot of places it's changed from a people back to a place. My second point, church growth is rough. I was having a conversation with another pastor that was having an alternative worship service that was more contemporary style in his church, in addition to his normal traditional service. This was a outreach idea, and I had previously had this idea and wanted to try and implement it within my church someday. So I was inquiring from him to see how it was working out from him. And the news that he had given me, because at this point they'd only been doing it 6 months or so, to me it was encouraging, but to him it sounded like defeat. I asked him, I said, "Have you gotten any new members since adding this contemporary service?" He said, "A few, but not many." And then went on to say, "You have to keep in mind that we live in a godless society and people aren't interested in church anymore, and there are only so many Christians in our area." I could have started preaching to the preacher, but I refrained. In his mind, he saw it as, we've been doing this 6 months and only 4 new guests. But the way I see it is, you have to celebrate and be grateful for the 4 new guests. Because that 4 new guests is a start. Starting isn't always easy. Starting isn't always glamorous, but it's a start. Without 4 new people, you'll never get to 40 new people. Without 40 new people, you'll never get to 400 new people. Oh, our church could never get that big, but why couldn't it? The only person keeping it from getting that big is you. God is only limited to what you limit him to. I'm going to give you another example because this point I want to drive home, because anything worth starting has a rough start. My wife and I started back in the gym earlier this year, and at first it was super intimidating because we would walk in and what you see is what you want, but that's not you. You get through the first night and the next morning you can barely move. It might suck, but it's a start, and there's no denying by anyone that with time and consistency and effort in the gym, it will pay off and eventually you see the results. It's the same when it comes to ministry. When you start something new, sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it's really rough. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable. But with time and consistency and effort, you will begin to see results. Third point, church growth in worship. In this verse, Jesus is laying out and describing that worship doesn't happen in a place. It doesn't happen in a tradition. It doesn't happen in a ritual. Worship happens in your heart. That being said, why is the church so afraid to change worship to be relevant to the world? Here's an example. If you go into a church that has been around a long time and you suggest a new idea for ministry, your overall response that you will receive is, "We've never done it that way." They say, "We've always done it this way." In order for growth to happen, we need to adapt. I can't speak for other denominations, but I can say for my home church, the Presbyterian Church, a lot of the churches in our area have celebrated or are soon to be celebrating their bicentennial, which they take great pride in, and they should, because that's an amazing thing for a church to last 200 years. But if you look back at the pictures of the congregations from then until now, you'll see my point. If they were to do, say, a class picture type picture of the congregations each year, that would just set it in stone. The church I grew up in, here's an example, at one point had a balcony seating up above, which I've noticed this in a lot of older Presbyterian churches actually, but in ours it's now covered up and boarded up. But I've seen in pictures where the entire 3 sections of pews in the bottom and the balcony were full on a regular Sunday service. But that was from nearly 100 years ago. The problem with doing worship now the same way that they did 200 years ago is it was relevant to the people then that they were bringing to church, but it's not relevant to the people that they're bringing to church now. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do readings and prayer and scripture, and none of that should be changed because that's all biblical. That's worship service wherever you go. But in order for church to survive and create and maintain any new growth at all, the church needs to adapt to the world around us. Here's where I'm going to step on some toes. Music is one of the most important and biggest ways that most people can worship. Music opens up pathways in our brains to deep-rooted memory and deeper connection with our soul that makes us vulnerable. Music in a worship setting can open a heart to a place that is normally closed off from whatever pain or struggle that you've had in your life that has caused you to lock it up. I know this is a touchy subject and it creates a lot of tension within a church, but music is so important for people that have a hard heart to receive a message and for even just a moment to soften their heart long enough to feel Jesus. That's the main goal here, right? To bring people to Jesus. That's our goal. Is that our main goal? That we should, if that is our main goal, then we should be making our worship services not just around our own personal growth in faith, but in starting the growth of others. I understand traditions, and I have no problem with order in a worship service, because without order, there's a lack of confidence in those that you're leading. The pastor that I was referring to earlier was a Presbyterian pastor, and I love the idea of relating to your current congregation by keeping a traditional service, but opening their minds to a more contemporary service that would make a newer guest more comfortable and more open to receiving Jesus. I want to be clear, because I don't want people to hear what I'm not saying. I don't think the church should change everything and they throw out their current service out the window and upset their current congregation. But what I'm suggesting is, in order for the church to grow, we should refocus our perspective on worship. My fourth point, church growth is an outreach. We need to serve the needs and the growth of our current congregation, but also serve the needs of the people outside the congregation. We as people have a desire within us to feel like we're a part of something. If a church body plants a seed of love, plants a seed of caring, plants a seed of forgiveness, plants a seed of acceptance and love in the community, and then in turn the seeds will grow, they'll only grow as much as you plant them. But after you plant the seeds, you have to continue watering them or they will never grow. What that means is, if it doesn't stop with, we do this dinner for the community once a year, and then during that dinner, we make several connections with non-believers, and then the church says, and then they say, we feel loved and welcome, but then the church doesn't do anything past that event. So they quickly forget. After the outreach event is done, the church has planted seeds. So what should we do? We should do another event, or we should contact the people that were at that event and ask them how they're doing. Ask them, is there any way the church can help you? Ask them, is there any way the church can serve them? Don't tell them that they need to come to church. Just be there for them. If you want to outreach into the community to bring people to Christ, you'll be much more effective if you serve the community rather than talking to the community. I'll give you an example. I recently spoke to an elder of a church, and their session had met and discussed outreach ideas to gain new members. And a couple of them suggested going door to door, inviting people to church. Door to door is a great idea, but rather than just telling them, come to church, why not try to serve them and then invite them to church? Why not say, I work at the church down the street, and we've been helping out some of your neighbors, and we were curious if there was any way we could help you. We want to know the community better and the needs of those in our community and help in any way that's possible. Now, if somebody brushes you off, instead of taking it offensively, because that's our normal human reaction, we should love them even more. Like, we should return later in that day or another day with a gift basket of food, maybe gas cards or gift cards for the grocery store. Because if we don't know what their needs are, why not try to help out a little bit in the ways that everybody has a need? This is just an example, but the point I'm trying to make is sharing Jesus with those around us isn't just about talk. It's about our walk. We need to make them feel as though they are part of something without them even being a part yet. Make them feel as though they are a part of the family before they are a part of the family. Point number 5, church growth happens in the love of Jesus. The early church grew at such a rapid rate Not by people standing saying, come to church, come to worship, you need to get to church, you need to repent, which all of that was true, but that was not how they were bringing people to the body of Christ. You can find this. Read letters after letters after letters found from the days of the time of that early church of people that had either become Christians themselves or they had just been around Christians. You'll read that the church spread from the church body being loving and caring and serving. Sunday service worship is very important and is great for feeding the faith of current believers in the congregation, but we have to keep in mind that worship is not confined to just a church building. When Jesus died on the cross, the Holy of Holies was torn in two. We were blessed now with a new life and an opportunity to directly speak, worship, and pray to God whenever we wanted. We take that for granted. How amazing, how reassuring, how much confidence does that give us that we have the ability to talk to love, and be loved by the holy God that created everything. We have a relationship with the God of the universe. If we truly believe that, shouldn't we live like that? My point number 6. Church growth happens when we take the pressure out of church. My wife and I experienced this recently with a different church that we attended for a little while. And I know there's a couple of sayings in the church that you hear all the time when the church is talking to new members, because it's not intimidating when you're a current member, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of someone else. That you'll hear the church say, are you saved? When did you get saved? What's your testimony? And they ask questions are really intimidating to some people, because there are some people that they make a decision on the spot to give their lives to Christ, sometimes at an event or some type of setting that is set up intentionally for that purpose. But not everybody has that story. Some people grew up in a church and had the knowledge, but at some point it all made sense and they accepted Christ. We all make the decision once to start with to accept Jesus, but it doesn't stop there. Some of you are thinking, well, you're only saved once. Once you accept Jesus, you're good. You're into heaven. Yes, that's true. But after we're saved, you make the decision. You don't instantly poof into heaven, do you? Well, we all wish that would be the case, but we don't just poof. If life was all about figuring it out and accepting Jesus, and that was all we needed to do, then wouldn't you think we would just instantly poof to heaven right after we made the decision? But then who would be here to tell everyone else? After you accept Jesus into your life and you make the decision to follow him, it's a celebration, but more than just one decision. It's a daily decision to follow him. After you decide to follow him, it's time to get to work. It's time to dig deep. It's time to learn about him. It's time to read his word. It's time to get to know him closer. It's time to change your lifestyle, to live the way that he's shown us how to live in his words. When we talk about talking to people about Jesus or sharing your faith, it's not always words. I'm going to give you an example. Most of us here probably have Facebook. Now, if you scroll through Facebook newsfeed, you're scrolling through your newsfeed, what actually makes you stop? What makes you usually stop? Because, to be honest, we often skip past and don't read people's just text statuses. We scroll until we see something that catches our eye. A friend of yours posts a status with a message of faith, and you scroll past it. You might read the first line or so, but then you continue on. But a little more scrolling down, and you find a picture of someone helping in a natural disaster, and you like the picture. It's like the saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. If we live like Jesus and we love like Jesus, we don't even have to talk like Jesus. If we simply live and love like Jesus, then people will notice. People will say, there's something different about them. What do they have? They're so happy. They're so loving. They're so forgiving. They're so caring. What is that? So that's how people see Jesus. If people see Jesus within you, they need to see Jesus within us, not pressuring them into it with just words. Worship is the showing of a love and respect for God. Worship is taking time to show love, respect, and adoration for God. To the point that I'm trying to get across is, and the point that I feel like Jesus is trying to make in John 4:21 is, true worship is done in the heart. And true worship is where we put our love, our time, our money, our priorities. Worship is more than just a Sunday service. Worship is a way of life. We worship in our service for others. We worship in song. We worship in reading. We worship in His Word. We worship in loving others. We worship in prayer. Worship is more than just Sunday morning. Worship is a way of life. Hi, this is a message to the church. I grew up in a Presbyterian church. I currently attend and I'm a member at a Presbyterian